Picture this. You're 19 years old, standing in a jungle so thick you can't see 10 feet ahead, drenched in sweat and rain, clutching a rifle with trembling hands. You've just watched your mate die from malaria. You haven't eaten a proper meal in days. Your boots are rotting off your feet. And then, through the mist and the towering trees, you see them. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. An entire army materializing like ghosts through the mountain fog. And they're all coming straight for you. Before we dive into one of the most astonishing displays of human courage you'll ever hear, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Are there any Australians in the house tonight? Any history buffs who thought they knew every World War II story? Because I promise you, what happened on a forgotten jungle track in 1942 will change how you think about heroism forever. This isn't just another war story. This is the story of how a nation's teenagers, many who'd never fired a gun in anger, stood against an empire's most elite fighting force and refused to break. This is about ordinary boys who became legends on a muddy track that most of the world had never heard of. This is about the moment Australia realized it would have to save itself because help wasn't coming. And this is about a battle so brutal, so desperate, and so consequential that military historians still study it today, shaking their heads in disbelief at what these young men endured and achieved. The year is 1942, and the world is burning. Europe has fallen to Hitler. The Pacific is a Japanese lake. Singapore, the fortress that was supposed to be impregnable, has surrendered in Britain's worst military defeat ever. Hong Kong has fallen. The Philippines are collapsing. Burma is being overrun. And now, Japan's gaze has turned southward, toward the last prizes in the Pacific, Australia and New Zealand. The Imperial Japanese Army, drunk on victory after victory, believes itself invincible. They have conquered an empire in 6 months. They have humiliated every Western power they've encountered. They are the best jungle fighters in the world, battle-hardened from years of warfare in China and Southeast Asia. And they have never ever been stopped. Port Moresby, a steamy, disease-ridden port town on the southern coast of Papua New Guinea. It doesn't look like much, just some tin-roofed buildings, a harbor, and mosquitoes. Lots of mosquitoes. But Port Moresby holds the key to Australia. Take Port Moresby, and Japanese bombers can reach every major Australian city. Take Port Moresby, and the invasion of Australia becomes not just possible, but inevitable. The Japanese war planners know this. The Australian commanders know this. And in July 1942, when intelligence reports start filtering in about Japanese troop movements on the north coast of Papua, everyone knows what's coming. The Kokoda track. 96 kilometers of hell carved through some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. It's not really a track at all. More like a series of muddy gouges clawing up and down mountain ranges that rise over 7,000 feet. The jungle here is primeval, suffocating. A green cathedral where sunlight never reaches the ground. The rain never stops. The temperature swings from scorching to freezing within hours as you climb and descend. There are leeches that drop from trees and burrow under your skin. There are mosquitoes carrying malaria and dengue fever. There are tropical ulcers that eat through flesh to the bone. There are mountains so steep that men have to crawl on hands and knees, hauling themselves up by roots and vines. And in 1942, this nightmare track is the only land route from the north coast of Papua to Port Moresby. The defenders of this crucial path, the 39th Battalion. Let that sink in for a moment. Not the 1st Battalion, not the 2nd, not even the 10th. The 39th. They're so far down the order of battle they're practically forgotten. They're militia, not regular army. They're the kids who were too young to volunteer for overseas service, the boys who signed up for home defense, thinking they'd spend the war manning coastal batteries and doing parade drills in Melbourne. The average age is 20. Many are 18, 17. Some lied about their age and are only 16. They've had minimal training. Most have never seen combat. They have World War I era rifles, limited ammunition, no heavy weapons, no artillery support, and no illusions about what's coming for them. Their commander is Lieutenant Colonel William Owen. A veteran of the First War, Owen is 42 years old, which makes him ancient compared to his boys. He's a teacher in civilian life, a quiet man who never sought glory. He has kind eyes and a gentle manner, the sort of person who'd help you with your homework, not lead you into battle. His superiors back in Port Moresby don't think much of him. He's not aggressive enough, they say. He's too soft on the men. He lacks the killer instinct. Owen doesn't argue with them. He just goes about his work with steady competence, checking on his soldiers, making sure they have whatever meager supplies can be scrounged, telling them stories to keep their spirits up during the endless rain. The boys love him. The brass tolerate him. Nobody expects him to be tested the way he's about to be tested. Late July 1942. The 39th Battalion is scattered in small outposts along the Kokoda track, with their forward position at Kokoda Station itself, a small village with an airstrip that serves as the only link to the outside world. The atmosphere is tense but uncertain. There are rumors of Japanese landings on the north coast at Gona and Buna, but no confirmed sightings. The jungle is so thick, the distance is so vast, that an entire army could be moving through the mountains, and nobody would know until they literally stumbled into each other. That's exactly what happens. Private Jack Wilkinson is on patrol, with 5 other men from B Company, moving quietly through the jungle near the village of Awala, about 20 miles north of Kokoda. Wilkinson is 19, a farm boy from Queensland who'd never left his home state until 6 months ago. He's skinny, sunburned, and terrified, though he'd die before admitting it to his mates. They've been walking for 3 hours, seeing nothing but endless green, hearing nothing but the screech of birds and the constant drip 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 of water from the canopy. Wilkinson is just thinking about how much he'd give for a cold beer and a meat pie when he steps around a massive tree trunk and freezes. There, not 20 yards ahead, is a Japanese soldier. Time stops. The Japanese soldier is as surprised as Wilkinson. For one eternal heartbeat, they just stare at each other. 2 teenagers in the middle of nowhere, both realizing in the same instant that everything is about to change. Then training takes over. Wilkinson brings up his rifle. The Japanese soldier does the same. Both fire. Both miss. The jungle explodes with noise. More Japanese troops come running. Wilkinson and his patrol scatter, crashing through the undergrowth, sliding down muddy slopes, hearts hammering, lungs burning, the sound of pursuit right behind them. They make it back to their forward post at Awala, gasping, wild-eyed, and deliver the news that will alter Australian history. The Japanese are here, they're on the track, and they're not a small raiding party. When the Aboyo patrol doubles back cautiously to scout the Japanese position, what they see turns their blood to ice water. Through the trees and mist, using binoculars with shaking hands, they count company after company after company of Japanese troops emerging from the jungle. Hundreds of soldiers, all moving south with mechanical precision. And behind them, supply columns stretching back into the jungle as far as they can see. The report goes up the chain of command. Kokoda Station. Port Moresby. Melbourne. At every level, the reaction is the same. Disbelief, then panic. When Australian intelligence officers piece together the scouting reports, aerial reconnaissance, and capture documents over the next few days, the picture that emerges is catastrophic. This isn't a raid. This isn't a diversionary force. This is a full-scale invasion. The Japanese South Seas Force, commanded by Major General Tomitaro Horii, has landed over 15,000 troops on the north coast with one objective: march over the Owen Stanley Range, take Port Moresby, and open the door to Australia. 15,000. The 39th Battalion has fewer than 400 combat-ready men. Do the math. That's roughly 40 Japanese soldiers for every Australian. The Japanese have artillery, mortars, machine guns, flamethrowers, combat engineers, medical units, supply trains, and years of jungle warfare experience. The Australians have bolt-action rifles, a few Bren guns, minimal ammunition, and kids who 3 months ago were working in shops and on farms. Military theory says you need a 3-to-1 advantage to successfully attack a fortified position. The Japanese have a 40-to-1 advantage. This shouldn't even be a battle. This should be a massacre followed by a victory parade. But here's what the Japanese don't know. What their intelligence officers failed to grasp. What their victory-drunk generals can't imagine. These Australian boys are about to make them earn every single yard. Lieutenant. Colonel Owen gathers his company commanders at Kokoda Station. The room is tense, thick with cigarette smoke and dread. Maps are spread across a wooden table, showing the impossible task ahead. Owen looks at each of his officers in turn. Young men in their 20s trying desperately to appear confident. To be the leaders their even younger soldiers need them to be. The silence stretches out. Finally, Owen speaks, his voice quiet but clear. Gentlemen, we've been given our orders. We are to hold Kokoda Station for as long as possible, then conduct a fighting withdrawal down the track. Our job is to delay the Japanese advance, to buy time for reinforcements to arrive in Port Moresby, to make the enemy pay for every mile. Command knows we're outnumbered. They know what they're asking of us. But if the Japanese take Port Moresby before our defenses are ready, Australia itself could fall. He pauses, looking down at the map, then back up at his officers. His next words are barely above a whisper, but they carry the weight of absolute conviction. We're not going to let that happen. These are our boys out there, our civilians back home. We will hold. We will fight. And we will make sure that when this is over, Australia remembers that when the moment came, the 39th Battalion stood its ground. Nobody speaks. Nobody needs to. They all know this is likely a death sentence. They all know the odds. And they all know they're going to do exactly what Owen just said. Because what else can they do? Run? Surrender? Let the enemy walk unopposed to their homeland? No, not while they're still breathing. The Japanese attack begins on July 28th. It starts with mortars, shells whistling through the jungle canopy and exploding among the Australian positions at Kokoda with devastating effect. The boys have never experienced bombardment before. The noise alone is overwhelming, a physical force that hammers at your skull and chest, making thought impossible. Trees are shredded. Earth. Fountains into the air. Men are thrown like rag dolls. And then, as suddenly as it started, the shelling stops. The silence afterward is somehow worse, because everyone knows what comes next. They come through the jungle like a wave, hundreds of Japanese infantry moving with practiced efficiency, using the terrain expertly. Their weapons fire disciplined and deadly. The Australians fire back desperately, working their bolt-action rifles until their hands are burned and blistered. A few Bren guns chatter from concealed positions, briefly slowing the advance. But the Japanese keep coming. They outflank positions. They use smoke and grenades. They charge with fixed bayonets, screaming battle cries. And slowly, inevitably, the defenders are pushed back. Lieutenant Colonel Owen is everywhere during the battle, moving from position to position with complete disregard for his own safety, encouraging his men, directing fire, physically helping to carry wounded soldiers to the rear. Men who see him that day will later say he seemed to bear a charmed life, walking through machine gun fire that tore up the ground around him without so much as a scratch. His calm presence keeps the defense together far longer than it has any right to hold. But even Owen's courage can't change the mathematics of 40-1 odds. By nightfall, Kokoda Station has fallen. The Australians have been pushed back, leaving their dead behind in the mud. The first round goes to Japan, as everyone knew it would. But something unexpected has happened. The Japanese advance, which should have swept the defenders aside in hours, took all day. The Australians made them pay for Kokoda with blood and time. More importantly, the Australians didn't break. They didn't surrender. They withdrew in good order, already preparing defensive positions further down the track. The message was clear. If you want Port Moresby, you're going to have to go through us. All of us. And we're not going anywhere. What follows is one of the most brutal campaigns in military history. For the next 2 months, across 96 kilometers of jungle hell, the 39th Battalion fights a running battle against an enemy that outnumbers them 10-1 at minimum, often more. They're reinforced piecemeal by other militia units and eventually by regular army troops returning from the Middle East, but they're always outnumbered, always outgunned, always disease-ridden and exhausted, and pushed to the absolute limit of human endurance. The pattern becomes grimly familiar. The Australians dig in at a defensible position, usually a ridge or village along the track. The Japanese attack with overwhelming force, using their numerical advantage and superior firepower. The Australians hold as long as possible, inflicting maximum casualties, then withdraw under cover of darkness to the next position and do it all over again. It's not glamorous. There are no glorious charges or decisive victories. It's just day after day of mud and death, holding on for one more hour, one more day, buying precious time with blood. The conditions are indescribable. The rain never stops. Men are constantly soaked, their skin wrinkled and rotting from perpetual wetness. Tropical ulcers eat through flesh, sometimes reaching the bone. Malaria is universal. Everyone has it. They just work through it until the fever gets so bad they collapse. Dysentery is rampant, leaving men hollow-eyed and skeletal. Supplies can only come up the track on the backs of native carriers. The incredible Papuan people who risk their lives daily to bring ammunition and food to the fighting men, and to carry wounded soldiers back to Port Moresby on stretchers over mountain tracks that would challenge a healthy person. The Australians call these Papuan carriers the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels, and they love them with a desperate gratitude that will echo through generations. These native men, who owe Australia nothing, who could easily fade into the jungle and wait for the war to pass, instead stay and serve and save lives at tremendous risk to themselves. They carry stretchers up slopes so steep that 4 men are required for each litter, walking in knee-deep mud, often under Japanese fire. They share their food with the soldiers. They use their knowledge of the jungle to find paths and water sources. They become not just helpers but comrades, and the white Australian soldiers, many from backgrounds where racial prejudice was common, learn a lesson in courage and loyalty that transcends color and culture. But even with the carriers' help, the situation becomes increasingly desperate. The Japanese keep pushing. They take Kokoda, then Deniki, then Isurava. At each position, the Australians inflict heavy casualties, but the math never changes. You can't kill 40 men for everyone you lose when you only have 400 men to start with. The sick and wounded pile up. Ammunition runs low. Food becomes scarce. Men are fighting on a handful of rice per day, so weak from hunger and disease that they can barely lift their rifles. At Isurava, in late August, the 39th Battalion makes its most desperate stand. Reinforced by the 214th and 216th Battalions, veteran troops fresh from fighting Rommel in North Africa, they face the full weight of the Japanese assault. For 4 days the fighting is apocalyptic. The Japanese attack again and again, sometimes in waves of hundreds, using every weapon in their arsenal. The Australians hold, counterattack, hold again. The casualties on both sides are staggering. Lieutenant Colonel Owen, the gentle schoolteacher who his superiors thought was too soft, proves them catastrophically wrong. He's at the very front of the line, weapon in hand, leading by example in the most literal sense possible. On August 29th, during a Japanese assault, Owen is organizing a counterattack when a machine gun opens fire on his position. He's hit multiple times. His men drag him to cover, but it's too late. The quiet man who loved his boys like they were his own sons dies in the mud of Isurava, still giving orders, still trying to protect his battalion until his last breath. His death breaks something in the men who knew him. But it also hardens something. They will not let his sacrifice be meaningless. They will hold. They will fight. For Owen. For each other. For Australia. The battle rages on. The Japanese, frustrated by the stubborn resistance, bring up fresh troops and increase the intensity of their attacks. The Australians are pushed back again, but slowly, grudgingly, making the Japanese earn every yard. Brigade Hill, Mission Ridge, Effogi, Minari. The names of these tiny villages and jungle ridges enter Australian legend, written in blood and mud. And then, something changes. The Japanese advance begins to slow. Not because they want to stop, but because they can't continue. Their supply lines, stretching back over the mountains to the north coast, are collapsing under the strain. The track that has punished the Australians is punishing the Japanese even more severely. They're suffering from the same diseases, the same exhaustion, the same starvation. They've taken shocking casualties, far more than their commanders expected. General Hori's force of 15,000 has been worn down to perhaps half that number, with thousands sick or wounded. And in September, devastating news reaches him. The Japanese landing at Guadalcanal has failed. Troops and supplies that were supposed to reinforce his drive on Port Moresby have been diverted elsewhere. He's on his own. Meanwhile, the Australians, despite their terrible losses, are getting stronger. Fresh troops are arriving in Port Moresby from Australia. Supplies are finally reaching the track in meaningful quantities. The Americans have entered the war and are providing air support. Most importantly, the Australians have something the Japanese don't. They're defending their homeland, and they've learned that they can fight and win against the supposedly invincible Japanese army. On September 26th, General Hori receives the order he's been dreading. Withdraw. After coming within 30 miles of Port Moresby, after fighting for 2 months through impossible terrain and stubborn resistance, the Japanese are ordered to retreat back over the mountains to the north coast. The advance has failed. The Japanese have been stopped. Now it's Australia's turn to advance. The hunted become the hunters. The boys, who were pushed back across 96 kilometers of hell, who watched their mates die, who held when holding seemed impossible, now pursue the retreating Japanese with grim determination. It's not easy. The Japanese fight savage rearguard actions all the way back. But the momentum has shifted. The psychological advantage has shifted. The Japanese are running and the Australians are coming. In November, Australian forces recapture Kokoda Station, the place where this nightmare began. The Iosanisi, battered, disease-ridden survivors of the 39th Battalion, those who made it through the entire campaign, stand once again at the village they were forced to abandon 4 months earlier. Most of the original 400 are gone, killed or invalided out with wounds or disease. The men who stand at Kokoda in November are hollow-eyed ghosts, barely recognizable as the fresh-faced boys who started this journey. But they're alive. They're victorious. And they've saved Australia. The campaign doesn't and at Kokoda. It continues for months more as the Australians push the Japanese back to the north coast, then assault their fortified beachhead at Gona and Buna, in some of the most horrific close-quarters fighting of the Pacific War. But the crucial moment, the turning point, was those first weeks when the 39th Battalion stood alone against 15,000 Japanese troops and refused to break. The final toll is staggering. Of the approximate 400 men of the 39th Battalion who fought on the Kokoda track, casualties approached 90%. Killed, wounded, or incapacitated by disease, almost none came through unscathed. The other Australian units that reinforced them suffered similar rates. The Japanese losses were proportionally even worse. General Hori himself died during the retreat, drowned while trying to cross a swollen river. His force of 15,000 was essentially destroyed as a fighting unit. But the numbers don't tell the real story. The real story is about what these young men discovered about themselves in that green hell. They discovered that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing your job despite being terrified. They discovered that heroes don't look like movie stars. They look like your neighbor, your classmate, your little brother. They discovered that when your nation's survival is at stake, ordinary people become extraordinary. Australia learned something too. For the first time in its history as a nation, Australia had defended itself without relying primarily on British troops. The Kokoda track proved that Australia could stand on its own, that Australian soldiers were among the finest in the world, and that the destiny of the nation was in its own hands. The cultural and political implications of this realization would reshape Australia for generations to come. The survivors of Kokoda, those who made it home, never boasted about what they did. Most of them rarely spoke about it at all. The memories were too painful, too private. They went back to their farms and their shops, raised their families, lived quiet lives. But on Anzac Day each year, when Australia remembers its war dead, the Kokoda veterans would gather, fewer each year, and in their eyes you could see the ghosts of their lost youth, their fallen comrades, and the terrible pride of knowing they stood when it mattered most. Today, the Kokoda track is a pilgrimage site. Thousands of Australians hike it each year, trying to understand what their grandfathers and great-grandfathers endured. They struggle up the same muddy slopes, gasp in the same thin mountain air, marvel at the same impossible terrain, and inevitably ask themselves the same question. How did they do it? How did boys with bolt-action rifles hold off an army? How did starving, disease-ridden teenagers fight for months without breaking? How did 400 stop 15,000? The answer is simple and profound. They did it because they had no choice. They did it because surrender meant the death of their nation. They did it because the man next to them was depending on them, and they couldn't let their mates down. They did it because quiet men like Lieutenant Colonel Owen showed them that leadership isn't about shouting and posturing. It's about being willing to die alongside your men. They did it because underneath the uniforms and the ranks and the military structure, they were just kids who loved their country and each other. And love is the strongest force in the world. The lesson of Kokoda isn't about tactics or strategy. It's not about weapons or training. It's about the incredible capacity of ordinary human beings to rise to extraordinary circumstances when they're fighting for something greater than themselves. It's about the power of courage in the face of hopeless odds. It's about the unbreakable bonds forged between people who face death together. It's about the sacred duty to stand up against overwhelming evil, even when standing up seems futile.